Good morning again, family. Thank you again for welcoming me in this space. I've had the pleasure of the years I've been in Indianapolis to come into this congregation, into this building, participate in community events, and I've always appreciated the ways in which this community practices meaning-making to the rhythms and rituals you do on a weekly basis. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So thank you for the hospitality. One useful thing about me, I guess, is that one of the traditions that has formed me is the Black liberation Christian faith movement, which is a beautiful tradition in and of itself. But part of that is when one comes to preach, there's a desire for it to be participatory, and I always desire that. And so my ask from you all today is that this is a dialogue, this is a conversation. So I would ask that you talk back, you yell back, you shout back. If you like what I'm saying, let me know. If you don't like what I'm saying, also let me know. This is a safe space for collective dialogue, and I'm convinced that the movement of the divine may be or may not be moving through my words, but I know is in this space, and collectively we'll move together. So thank you for that. Let me also acknowledge that we are on traditional Miami and Kickapoo lands here in central Indiana, lands that were plundered and taken from the people who still very much exist. But many of their traditions and spaces were robbed of them. And so I also acknowledge that while I stand here today with a particular set of experiences, vision, and imagination, there are certainly those who came before me in these exact same spaces. And I want to make sure to honor them as well. Thank you. One thing to also name is I am an organizer. I'm a community organizer, which means I may be showing up with some lingo and jargon that doesn't make sense. And so I want to qualify some of that lingo and jargon, one of which is I use the word systems a lot. I don't mean computer systems. I don't mean networks. I mean structures and principalities in our world, that we all navigate systems consciously and unconsciously. Our housing market is a system. Our medical system is a system. The way in which we engage one another is operated in systems. And these systems often are structured and usually structured in a way that causes harm and destruction, causes inequality and distance, separation from one another. And so I want to name that because as I talk in this space and I use the word system, I always want to make sure to qualify that and not bring any confusion. Now, before I get going, I'm going to read this poem one more time. Then I'm going to ask that you turn to a neighbor and just share what jumps out to you. Maybe it's a word, maybe it's a line, maybe it's an image. But I would ask that you share with somebody. So here it is. Allison Funk, the prodigal's mother, speaks to God. When he returned a second time, the straps of his sandals broken, his robe stained with wine. It was not as easy to forgive. By then his father was long gone himself, leaving me with the other son, the sullen one, whose anger was an instrument he tunes from good morning on. I know, there's no room for a man in the womb. But when I saw my youngest coming from far off, so small he seemed a kid on its unsteady legs, she-goat, what will you do, I thought, remembering when he learned to walk. Shapeshifter, it's like looking through the water. The heat bends, it blurs everything. Brush, precipice, a shambles between us. Thank you. So turn to someone, share what jumped out to you. All right, thank you. Someone share back with me what you heard your neighbor share. What jumped out to them? Say that a little bit louder. The mother's anguish. That's good. Over here, I heard shapeshifter. That term jumped out. What else did you all hear?
It's unresolved.
Unresolved. Okay. Yeah. Sullen. Yeah.
You know, when somebody in the family goes away and does bad things and then comes back to forgiveness the first time, it's one thing. Then they go out and do it again, and the second time, yeah, it's different.
Yeah.
Do you keep allowing them?
Yeah.
Can you forgive again? Forgive or reconcile again?
Yeah. All right, I love this. Thank you. This is where my headspace is at. And this is what's been impressed on my spirit is some of these same words. I love this poem by Allison Funk because it plays on this parable from the Gospels and the Christian Bible of the prodigal son. Now, this story has transcended the Christian tradition. It's now more of a cultural mythology than it is anything else. And the fascinating thing about the story of the prodigal son, as it's taught in Christian circles, I mean, one, it's a beautiful story, right? There's this fracture in relationship. This young son who takes his inheritance early, blows it all, screws up, comes home expecting to be treated like a second-class member of the family, and the father sees him and runs to him, welcomes him back in the home, welcomes him and restores him back in the family. There's a big party where the community shows up. It's beautiful. Allison Funk takes this and she starts to bring it into what I would consider a more realistic expression, more authentic expression. That the parable, the original parable is beautiful but simple. It's linear and it has a very clear sense of closure. The son gets restored back in the community. The other son's angry, but we work that out, and at the end of the day, we all good. But in this story, it's much more complex. That reconciliation is a little bit harder. That in fact, there might actually be a cycle of addiction here. There might be a cycle of constant repair and constant fracturing. The line where it says, it wasn't easy to forgive the second time. How many times did this son leave? How many times did they try to bring him back? And how difficult was it to do each time? I love this idea because reconciliation and repair is always complex, and it is never easy, both interpersonally and within the systems I was talking about earlier. Structurally, reconciliation and repair is never easy. When prepping for this, I thought of all the ways in which there was pain and fracturing within my own family and genealogical story. The ways in which those things didn't get repaired. The ways in which parts of my family were cut off and broken, parts of myself cut off and broken, and the cost of what that means. It makes it a little harder to forgive. For you all, did the stories of when your family was fractured and your lineage was broken, did that come up for you? What did that feel like? Brought it back right to the surface. Was there pain there? Yeah. I think sometimes in our imagination, we are given a sense that reconciliation can be easy. I say this as one who used to be an anti-racism facilitator and trainer, DEI consultant, particularly working with churches. In fact, as a pastor, that was one of my assignments, was helping a predominantly white congregation become what they deemed as an anti-racist, multiracial congregation. And along the way, I was always fascinated that they desired to be what they called a reconciling community, what many call a reconciling community. But the pathway there was always linear and all rather simple. I remember asking, how exactly do y'all plan to become a diverse church if that's the goal? Oh, we got to change our music up. That's what we're going to do. I was like, oh, I didn't know that there was a group of black and brown folks up the street at a Starbucks just waiting on a white church to start playing some Hezekiah Walker. If that's all it took, man, what are we doing here? Why am I here? The reality was our anti-racism book studies and the change in music and occasionally having me preach didn't actually change much, because reconciliation and repair were much more complex and much less linear than anticipated. And in every space, that is the truth. But it is easy to live into this very simple easy expression as we get in the original parable. Another line that jumped out to me that I'm sure landed for some of you is this line where Allison Funk says, "There is no room in the womb for this man." Ooh, that line hit me like a gut punch. I think about the ways in which as this mother is looking at her son that she always will see as a child, he was so much more safer and protected in her womb. He was so much more able to be taken care of in her womb. But now that he is out, she can no longer protect him in the same ways. Well, I can't understand that in an embodied sense. I also recognize that the pain that comes with that. I'm a parent of a 4 and a 2-year-old. I don't know how many times a day my children fall and hurt themselves. It's a lot. But I also think about the emotional pain and the social pain that they could experience. I was so much safer for them in the womb. This line had an added emphasis for me because the womb has become a contested space in our social and political realities. The womb is a contested space where one would mother have agency to protect their child no longer has agency over that space. So I think of this line of this mother saying, "There is no room in the womb for this man." And I treat that as a double entendre, meaning it's got multiple layers to it. The first being that there's no room for this son who is broken. There's also no room for another man who actually doesn't belong in that space. There's no room for other men who don't belong in that space, deeming what is safe within it. And in our social political reality, there are others who are determining what safety looks like for the mother's wombs. But I also think about it in another way. And this, for many, is on the forefront of our imagination because of the ways in which agency has been stripped. But because of the ways in which our systems have existed, because of the ways in which we haven't reconciled and repaired, this is not a new practice or new reality. That for generations, enslaved black folks had their bodies and their wombs plundered. That for generations, enslaved black women in our prison systems have had their bodies plundered, their wombs taken. And that even today, our current immigration system robs women of their wombs as they come across the border, as we saw most clearly in some whistleblower reports in 2020, that ICE detention centers had folks who were taking from women. There is no room in this womb for this man. And again, I come back to my first point, that reconciliation repair becomes increasingly more complex when we realize that a singular law in Indiana is actually part of a longer tradition of disrepair and harm, a tradition that spans the whole length of this country. I'm going to go to the last line that jumped out to me in preparation for today. Shapeshifter. It's like looking through water. The heat, it bends, it blurs everything, brush, precipice. This word shapeshifter, Colleen said it reminds her of science fiction. That's something you only see in movies, people that are shapeshifting. When I was always asked growing up, what superpower would you have if you had any superpower? Shapeshifting was always like top 3 for me. It just seemed really cool. But as I prepped for this, what came to me is that shapeshifting is what many of us are asked to do already. Many of us have to shapeshift. The mother in this poem has been shapeshifting. She is not only mother, but she's first responder. She is not only mother, but she is service provider. She is not only mother, but maybe she is field medic if her son is using substances. She's not only mother, but she is economic sustainer for her son who continues to leave. The father is long gone. It's now up to the mother. The mother is not just the mom, she is also mediator for her other son. That again, the way in which our systems operate that create disrepair and fracturing of relationship demand that some of us take on the responsibility of shapeshifters, more so than others. The ways our systems fail demand that we put on different forms of ourselves to respond. I recently reread the poem of Wearing the Mask by Maya Angelou as she talks about the ways black women in the 60s, 70s, 80s who were treated as second-class citizens had to respond with a smile and a laugh when they were called girl by women that they were the help for, or small children they were the help for. To put on the mask of a laugh and a smile to hide the pain that was underneath, to stay alive. I reread the transcripts of George Floyd, the video of George Floyd being killed, the transcripts of the body cam footage of Elijah McClain, who was also killed by the police. In both instances, those men put on the mask and apologized. They said, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Repeating an apology for something they didn't do, trying to apologize for the ways in which they were being killed. They shape-shifted to not be victims anymore, but to treat themselves as perpetrators of some crime in order to be kept alive. I think of Angelique Gomez, a mother in Uvalde, Texas, who not only is a mom, but shapeshifted into a first responder, hopping fences, running past police to go get her children out of a classroom where first responders chose not to. And it is often folks of color who are asked to be shapeshifters, to take on more, to hold families together during addiction and brokenness, who hold people together because the systems have failed them and chose not to protect them. But I also recognize that in this room, I have a lot of less melanated folks, and you too have been asked to shapeshift. Shapeshifting is demanded of all of us in these systems in different ways, but all harmful. Some of you are in this space because the traditions that you grew up in demanded that you shapeshift and cut parts of yourself off in toxic and harmful ways. And you've had to return back to your truest form, who you authentically are. We celebrate and honor that, but recognize the trauma that comes with being asked to shapeshift. Some of you exist in social spaces still shapeshifting, not sure of who you are, not sure who you can be, not sure where it is safe to show up as your full self. But I, as an organizer, I come with this particular bias. That liberation, for some of us, cannot happen until it happens for all of us. And all of us in these systems need liberation. Because some of the shape-shifting that we deal with, some of the shape-shifting that we wrestle with is that the shooting in our community or the violence or the carceral system impacts black or brown folks over there, but I want to help and do good, but we must realize that it's also harming us too. It is also harming you too. That the same pollution and the same lead in the water in a Flint, Michigan or a Gary, Indiana is supported and empowered by the same people doing that in Indiana and Indianapolis. That the same people making decisions that harm black and brown people will not blink or bat an eye if you get in the way of those same machinations that are eating and destroying bodies. You are no more safe in these systems. And the shape-shifting that is demanded of you is that you have to sometimes close yourself off to that pain. Turn from it. Pretend that you are safe from it. Live in guilt and shame because you don't see the pain or you don't feel the pain from it. And these are all lies that these same systems generate and place onto you. That within our own family where there are prodigal ones, within our own family where there was harm and disrepair, those are some of the same systems perpetuating themselves over and over and over again. And in many of our families where there's sexual violence and trauma, there's also racism and homophobia and transphobia. In many of our families where there is abuse, there's also economic disenfranchisement and poverty. In many of our same families where there is brokenness and generational collapse of relational structures. In my case, I'm 3 or 4 generations deep in divorce. Many of those relationships abusive. Systems have failed every single time and left broken people in their midst. And then it becomes on individuals to shape-shift to take care of it. Let me close with this. In the biblical story of the prodigal son, at the end there's a party. The community returns to restore this young man back into relationship. The community recognized their responsibility of showing up in celebration to return this young man back into family. In Alison Funk's beautiful poem, there's an imagination of characters who have been erased. And I don't know if this was intentional by her as the author, but the community is not present in this story. In the midst of her pain, in the midst of her sorrow, the same folks that welcomed her son originally are not there for her. which is why she is shape-shifting, because no one else has come to support her. Many of us exist as that mother. Many of us exist as that captive maternal. And I use that term not in a gendered context, but one who is having to shape-shift and hold together communities, families, loved ones, because of the way in which we've been isolated and cut off. The community, I would contend, may not have had the tools to grieve with this mother, may have not had the tools to show up in her sorrow and sullenness, may have not had the capacity to show up in the pain in which she was holding. And maybe in public she had put on a mask, yes, but nobody had developed the type of relationships to show up and be with her in that. So what does that mean for us, family? It means that for many of us, we are holding some sort of pain in that way and shape-shifting. For all of us, there are folks in our community who are doing that. In my organizing work, and I hate this, we have at least 3 mothers who have had their children killed by the police that organize with us. 3 mothers that for a long time held that pain privately and didn't have the community surround them. Or for a brief moment did. They marched for their sons. They protested for their sons. And then it stopped. And those mothers continue to live having to shape-shift that they're okay. And then we have people in our base who have family members who struggle with addiction. And in Indiana, we have one of the highest overdose rates in the country. And that for many of us, these axes of pain and brokenness are not that far from us. Some of us are within our own home. Some of us are loved ones that we know. And I wonder what it means for a community to show up both in celebration, but also in grief. That if we started to take off the mask and stop shape-shifting, we might know what it means to protect. We might know what it means to create our own collective wombs for those who are hurting and start to repair where there's been brokenness. Start to create reconciliation of the complexity of our pain and our suffering. And I'm an organizer, so the invitation is that we have to do this not because we can save somebody else, but because we are the ones that are in need of liberation too. So let me end with this. She-goat, what will you do? I thought, remembering when he learned how to walk. I hope today we ask ourselves the question, what will we do? What will we do for our own liberation? Not stepping into justice work for the sake of another community, which does need justice, but because we ourselves need liberation. Thank you.